from 2154 to 2163.
Go for it, Ren.
Regime, Rahim. Seek refuge in God from Satan, reject the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Where do we go from here? Do not say of those who are killed in the cause of God, they are dead. They are alive at their Lord, but you do not perceive. We will surely test you through some fear, hunger, and loss of money, lives, and crops. Give good news to the steadfast. When an affliction befalls them, they say, we belong to God, and to him we are returning. These have deserved blessings from their Lord and mercy. These are the guided ones.
Sorry, that's science.
Hello?
Sorry.
Okay. Hajj pilgrimage. The nose of Safa. Assalamu alaikum, Samantha. Can you please mute yourself?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay. Oh, she's calling me. Okay. The nose of Safa and Marwa are among the rites decreed by God. Anyone who observes Hajj or Umrah commits no error by traversing the distance between them. If one volunteers more righteous works, then God is appreciative, omniscient. Gross offense. Those who conceal our revelations and guidance after proclaiming them for the people in the scripture are condemned by God. They are condemned by all the condemners. As for those who repent, reform, and proclaim, I redeem them. I am the Redeemer, most merciful. Those who disbelieve and die as disbelievers have incurred the condemnation of God, the angels, and all people on the day of judgment. Eternally they abide therein. Retribution is never commuted for them, nor are they reprived. Your God is one God. There is no God but He, most gracious, most merciful. And the footnote of 2154 says the righteous do not really die. They simply leave their bodies here and go to the same paradise where Adam and Eve once lived. See Appendix 17 for the proof and the details. And 2155 is the test is designed to prove that we worship God alone under all circumstances, and refers to 29:2. Do we have any? We just read the verses from 2154 to 2163. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything to raise about these verses that were just read? And you can either come unmute yourself and speak, or you can type in the VC1 chat, which is the associated text chat for this voice channel.
I'll make a comment about 154. It says, do not say those who are killed in the cause of God, they are dead, they are alive at their Lord. Most of you do not perceive. We think this life is the reality, but God describes this body as like a garment that, in essence, the real self, the soul, it continues living. Lived for billions of years before this life, and it's going to continue living for eternity afterwards. And we have this perception that when someone is dead, that they go to nothing, and this is it's interesting. The atheists and people who genuinely believe this, you can tell that they don't, because if you really believe this life was everything, you would do everything to optimize, to have the upper hand, to have every benefit and stuff like that when you're in this life. But you see that they have these constraints, that they think deep down that there's something else, even though that they're not willing to kind of like openly admit that.
So I wanted to make a couple comments starting from the top, 2154. says, do not say those who killed in cause of God they are dead. They are alive at their Lord, but you do not perceive. So this proves that when you are righteous and you die, you actually don't die. Your soul gets removed before the bodily death and suffering, and you actually just move on to be with God in the next life. So I think that's really important. The next issue that I wanted to raise was the next verse. It says, we will surely test you through some fear, hunger, and loss of money, lives, and crops. It's really interesting. I think that the test is regarding fear and hunger, and then so it's actually three. There's three categories of tests that are described here. There's some fear, hunger, and then loss of something. And then this is the third category in my view, and it includes loss of money, loss of lives, and loss of crops. This is the way I see it. I think this is correct grammatically. If someone thinks otherwise, I'd like to hear that point of view. But for example, if I lose grandparents, if they pass away, then I think that's a test because that's loss of life, you know, and death is inevitable. We can't expect everyone to survive at all times. We're all on death row. We're all going to die anyway. We're leaving this world, if you want to put it lightly. So we have to be steadfast, and if we are steadfast, we get the good news. And when affliction befalls us, we say, we belong to God, and to Him we are returning.
Assalamualaikum. I would like to hear somebody discuss that aspect of the test with regards to Jacob and how they perceived what was happening. He was fairly old when he was blind, and what part of his test would this be? Is this part of it still part of an admission, or how would somebody explain that?
God willing, I can take a attempt. What's interesting about Jacob is that he fully submitted. He knew that the brothers, and there's certain kind of hints towards this, the brothers were plotting and scheming against Joseph. But he also knew that if there's anything that was meant to happen, there's nothing he could do to alter that decision. So when he uses the expression, he says, "Lest the wolf may devour him," when the brothers ask if Joseph can come along. It's interesting, he doesn't say a wolf, he says the wolf, right? And I believe that this is an indication, knowing that the devil's up to something here. The entire time that Joseph is gone, he knows that Joseph is alive. The part that gets at him is he doesn't know when he's going to be reunited. And the big concern he has, and this is I have reasons to believe this, is he wasn't sure if the devil got to him. Not that he died, not that he something terrible happened. The worst thing that Jacob could imagine was that the devil got the best of him, and then here's his opportunity to dole out justice on his brothers. And it was a sign. This goes like pretty deep, but the sign was the shirt, and I'll tell you why. The shirt occurs 3 times in the Quran, and it's the only time that this word qasam is used in the Quran. Okay. The first incident is the brothers took his shirt, poured fake blood on it, and gave it to the dad. And they make the claim, they say, even if we were telling the truth, you wouldn't believe us. Right? Meaning that everyone knows they're lying and they're just acting like, just go along with it, okay? The second time his shirt was involved was with the governor's wife, where she tore his shirt trying to take away his chastity, okay? One tried to take away his life, one tried to take away his chastity. The third time the shirt comes into the narrative is when, after everything was revealed, Joseph took his own shirt off his own back and gave it to his dad. To me, I see that it says both Jacob and Joseph, they were able to understand the signs, the narratives. This was symbolic of saying, look, all these people came after these things of mine, and I'm willingly giving it away to you. And to me, that was the test for Jacob, was the fact that this entire time he never knew that these terrible things that happened to Joseph caused him to become spiteful and revenge towards his brother. That's why he's told the brother, he says, look, enter through separate doors, but if anything God wills, there's nothing I can do to deter that. And that was the one thing that was basically, that was his test. was to see could he maintain, and he uses the term Jamil Sabir, right? Basically, the literal translation of this, Rashad translated as quiet patience, is actually beautiful patience. During that whole time, despite the fact that he's having this emotional roller coaster, he's constantly reflecting and saying, okay, I'm going to resort to quiet patience. And if you look at what 2:56 says, it says, when an affliction befalls them, they say, we belong to God, and to him we are returning. And that the purpose of these tests is to shake us up. Right? And we see in 2:14, it says, let me just. You expect to enter paradise without being tested like those before you? They were tested with hardship and adversity and were shaken up until the messenger and those who believed with him said, where is God's victory? God's victory is near.
So, just in terms of the explanation of the categorization of the 4 types of tests, where would you put that aspect of the test for Jacob? Do you see? I mean, I don't. I have confusion in my mind regarding admission. You know what I mean?
Honestly, so we can look at the different kind of tests, right? So we have a admission test. This is something that happens early on that's going to shake the person to the fact, are they going to believe or disbelieve? I don't think this was an admission test because it's like, look, if God forbid Joseph went astray, I don't think Jacob would have renounced the religion. Okay. Secondly, is the fact of just, again, the age of Joseph. The other one is a retribution, a pinch, something to basically get him on the right track. I don't think that was this. The other one was annihilation. Obviously, it's not annihilation. And the fourth one is a blessing in disguise. Consider this. Because Joseph was thrown into the well, he was sold into slavery, he was thrown into prison. It's through these events that he became basically the Ben Bernanke of the Egyptian Empire. That he was the one who was controlling the provisions. That he was the one that was able to save not only the Egyptians but his own people, the children of Israel, from starvation. So I see this as a blessing in disguise, but at the same time, it's a purification. Is the fact that God knows how much we can dole out. The aspect is we're unaware of what our limits are. And God pushes Jacob to be able to reach his potential, that despite all these years, all this time, that he was still steadfast, that he still resorted to quiet patience. These tests that are for the prophets and messengers, they're intentionally the extreme example. If any of us were this righteous, our test would be just as extreme. But most of us, what we're going to be tested with is going to be a fraction of what these people were tested with. You look at the spectrum. Job, right, lost everything. Solomon gained everything. We'll probably be somewhere in between. Those extremes.
Okay, if there's no further comments on this portion, I had a question about 2160. So in 2160, it says, as for those who repent, reform, and proclaim, I redeem them. I am the Redeemer, most merciful. So what does this mean? Obviously, I know what repent means. I'm assuming what reform means. What does it mean to proclaim? So is that to people or to God? I wanted to get points of view on this. Thank you.
Surah 24 describes these different allegories of light. And it's actually interesting. The word kafar, the root of it is a tiller, someone who plants seeds and covers it with dirt so you don't see it. And the way I see it is that the distinction between a believer and a disbeliever is basically a believer's appreciative. They're constantly glorifying God. They're constantly radiating God's light. A disbeliever, on the other hand, is unappreciative. You look at them and you see darkness, you see bitterness, you see, in essence, resentment, spite. And these are the distinguishing factors. So when I think in the sense of proclaim, I just think of it in the sense of you're proclaiming God's blessings. You're constantly commemorating. You're constantly reflecting. When you talk to someone, they hear nothing but blessings coming out of your mouth. And that's ultimately kind of the state we want to be, because when you talk to someone, you see a disbeliever, an atheist, it's like they're just the most bitter, pessimistic, resentful kind of people. And by God's leave, you talk to some of these, very devout believers, and you're just like you're energized just being in their presence by God's leave. And if we look at the example like of the light in Surah 24, we see that the disbelievers they're described like dark clouds, and you think, what is a cloud that causes it to be dark? It absorbs all the light; it doesn't reflect it. But then when it talks about the believers, it says like the light is like blinding, like it's like snow. That people they just get fed up being around them, and this is what actually repulses the disbeliever. They don't want to be around the person who's happy and joyful and laughing and smiling. They want to be, what's it, commiserate, find other people who are grumpy and miserable. There's a verse this just kind of reminds me of. It's a 16 112, and I just feel like it's so reflective of just our time. It says, God cites the example of a community that used to be secure and prosperous, with provisions coming to it from everywhere. But then it turned unappreciative of God's blessings. Consequently, God caused them to taste the hardships of starvation and insecurity. Such is the requital for what they did. Here's a community that is getting bombarded with blessings left and right. They didn't have to work for them, they didn't have to do anything, they just were there. They turned unappreciative. And because of that unappreciation, they had to taste hardship and adversity that God willing they come back to the right path. And you look at how many of these communities are just overtly blessed, but they raise some of the most unappreciative, bitter people on the planet. If you hear most of the people in the first world, it sounds like they're living in gulags, for the supposed hardships that they have to face. What was the joke? The one person from The View when they're talking about the situation in Ukraine. She's like, "Oh, I can't believe this. First, I lost my vacation because of COVID. Now I can't go visit Western Europe because of this." And it's like, wow, like that's the pain, that's the suffering that you're concerned about. And it just shows this level of entitlement that uh, we end up having when we just have things too easy.
And
There's a
that also speaks. Oh,
Jeff.
that also speaks. I was going to say that also speaks to how had God, if it were good for us, God would have given even the disbelievers homes with elaborate roofs and beautiful spacious belongings. But it's the fact that we can't handle it. It corrupts us to have more than we can handle, and so we should be appreciative of the position that we're in.
Yeah, it pastes the verse. It says, "If we're not that all the people might become one disbelieving congregation, we would have granted everyone who disbelieves in the most gracious mansions with silver roofs and stairs upon which they could climb." And like, people are willing to sell out their entire destiny, their entire eternity for this moment of glory. And it's such short-sightedness. There's a expression, it's a little crude, but it's a procrastination is like masturbation. You only end up screwing yourself. These people who are basically screwing their future selves for the sake of having this joy and slight bit of sinful enjoyment in this world are really doing themselves the ultimate disservice. That's the ultimate epitome of selfishness. You're so selfish that you're willing to forego, you of the future for the sake of you of today. And we read it in 161 and 162. It says, "Those who disbelieve and die as disbelievers have incurred condemnation of God, the angels, and all the people on the day of judgment. Eternally they abide therein. Retribution is never commuted for them, nor are they reprieved." And to sell everything out, all this eternity, for just some temporary, enjoyment, it's a really bizarre thing. The way that the devil can basically enchant people to be so short-sightedness, and we're all vulnerable. That's the thing. This is the reality we have to be conscientious of. It's not our cleverness. It's literally the grace of God that protects us. And consider Adam and Eve were in paradise. They had everything. God was with them. Yet the devil still duped them. If under those circumstances, these two righteous individuals did not stand a chance, what chance is there for us without God's help? Like, this is the reason that we have to perpetually be seeking refuge in God. Because without God, we would not stand a chance against these schemes. But it's strictly out of God's mercy that he protects us. Imagine if you could instantly be able to see you in the future. Any decision you make, you can see how that ends up in the future. Like, what decisions would you make? I don't know if you guys watch this show, Rick and Morty, and there was a episode where there was these crystals in these glasses that if they wore, they could see how their lives end up. So he's trying to basically dictate everything he says and does in order to achieve this one outcome that he wants. And but imagine if you could see what you would end up in all of eternity. If you had that conscientiously on front of mind, how would that affect what decisions you make? If you saw yourself, like it says, one of the blessings of Abraham is that he was conscious of the hereafter, that he was conscious that there was a day of judgment. Like, if we knew at every waking moment, it's like, look, is this decision going to take me to heaven or hell? And we genuinely contemplated that this could mean an eternity of pain and suffering or an eternity of joy and bliss. Now, how would that impact the decisions we make? Would we get angry? Would we get upset? Would we lash out? Would we, move towards lust and sinful acts?
Do we have any other questions or comments on the verses we read? We read from 154 to 163. If there are no further questions, I could put this next set of verses we're reading. For anyone who's new or listening, we are in VC1 chat, posting the verses that we are reading. Does someone have a question or comment so far?
I think it's worth talking about 164. I mean, it's overwhelming signs of God. Like, why are these, so overwhelming?
So, do you want to read it first?
Sure. It says, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, the alternation of the night and the day, the ships that roam the ocean for the benefit of the people, the water that God sends down from the sky to revive dead land and to spread in it all kinds of creatures, the manipulation of the winds, the clouds that are placed between the sky and the earth. There are sufficient proofs for people who understand.
Okay, because we hadn't even read this verse, and so do we want to read more verses, or
we didn't read 164?
No, we went to 163, I believe.
Oh, okay, my bad.
I actually have a comment on one of the verses. Let's see, it's the one on concealing revelation. Was that 158? Let's see. Let's see. Oh, no, that's 159. 159. Oh, the blessing be upon you. Those who conceal our revelations and guidance, after proclaiming them for the people in the scripture, are condemned by God. They are condemned by all the condemners. I think about this in terms of myself. Like, I think of Revelation, all the information that I've learned through Dr. Khalifa, and for threat of the accusations, that's not in the Quran. I feel like sometimes there's a hesitation to provide the explanation that we were provided. And I thought maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
I mean, did you want to share some of your thoughts on it as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, uh, it's interesting because in a conversation the other night, the bee mentioned in the categorization of the veins that came after Dr. Khalifa. One, he's saying the submitters, and he clarified that by saying that the Quran is divine and that the teachings of Dr. Khalifa are divine as well. That group thinks that. And I never really thought of it like that way, in a sense. That kind of was like, ooh, wow, because it feels like it sets me up as putting something beside the Quran. But upon further thought, I thought to myself, well, wait a second. How else can I look at it? How else can I look at that information and those explanations if they are not divinely inspired? So that is that's the quandary there. And I mean, I want to share that information. It explains everything. See, that was one of the things great about the message from Dr. Khalifa, is that it explained everything. Suffering's explained. What this transition from this life to the next life. How gross sin brings up with me in me.
I think there's a distinction that needs to be made, though, between divine revelation in the form of inspiration and kitab, where it's the literal word of God. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, that they conflate those two. They're two separate things. When we're dealing with kitab, like, this is the verbatim word of God. This is exactly as God has dictated to his prophets, that's being shared by his messenger. When it comes to wahi, anzala, where what God sent down, this can form any kind of divine inspiration. And what I believe Rashad received was this form of divine inspiration, where God through his messengers communicated this information to him, and he, to the best of his ability, is conveying this to us. But we shouldn't confuse that this is the literal word of God, because I think that aspect is, this is the word of Rashad, inspired by God, which is just different. It's interesting that 159 says, those who conceal our revelations and guidance after proclaiming them for the people in the scripture. That, again, people are willing to conceal the truth if it means preserving their ego or their understanding. And this is something, as believers, we should always, be willing to kill our egos, our opinions, when we see that there's a conflict, even if it's at our own detriment. When God says, one of the worst crimes someone can commit is bearing false witness. It says whether the person is a relative, a family member, is rich or poor, We have to be equitable in all our witnessing. And this is particularly true in regards to the revelations and guidance. That, we never try to put our ego, our own personal opinions, over what God states. Now, it's a given. We're always going to have a bias, but we should try our utmost to eliminate that. And I see that that's kind of the whole concept of killing our egos, is that we're trying to say, okay, I'm going to be as sincere as I possibly can, look at the verses for what they are, and then try to apply them to the best of my ability without a personal bias.
All right. So we have about half hour to do the reading, talk about the verses we read. Anyone have any comments on the verses we read? If not, do we have a volunteer for 2163 to 2170? I guess we read 2164, so we could start at 2165. Monica, did you want to read?
No, thank you.
All right, do we have another volunteer to read? Cho, you have a good voice. Do you want to read? Oh,
Hello.
hold on a second. Before you read, we just got a question. Can someone explain the knolls of Safa and Marwa? This is a question by Katerina.
These are two hills that are basically you traverse between. I don't know if you'd even call them hills. During Hajj, you can probably find a image online.
I don't know if it'll be good for me to read. I'm on my phone right now. I cracked my screen the other day, and it's hard for me to see anything. Like half of it's just very bad. Actually, hold on.
It's funny if you look at kind of what they've done. So there's these two. So Navid posted it too. They made it in this like beautiful indoor marbled floor space where you can basically traverse between these two knolls. And yeah, it's part of the Hajj pilgrimage. Traverse back and forth. Katerina, would you want to read?
Assalamu alaikum. I can't right now. Sorry.
Of course. Samantha, would you like to read?
Where are we? 160.
Navi pasted it. You can start actually from 165 to 171. Go to.
I can read it. I mean, no one wants to read.
I put in VC1 chat, and Cho's always excited to read, so go ahead. I put in VC1 chat.
I actually have the translation, Rashad's translation.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's that knoll, to answer Monica's question, that's a knoll, and it's either Marwa or Safa. And a knoll is just like a very small hill, basically.
He said 165 to 171.
Yes, please.
All right. Yet some people set up idols to rival God and love them as if they are God. Those who believe love God the most. If only the transgressors could see themselves when they see God, the retribution. Excuse me. They will realize then that all power belongs to God alone, and that God's retribution is awesome. 66. Those who are followed will disown those who have followed them. They will see the retribution, and all ties among them will be severed. Those who followed will say, "If we can get another chance, we will disown them, as they have disowned us now." God thus shows them that the consequences of their works as nothing but remorse. They will never exit hell. O people, eat from earth's products that is lawful and good, and do not follow the steps of Satan. He's your most ardent enemy. He only commands you to commit evil and vice, and to say that about God what you do not know. When they are told, follow what God has revealed herein, they say, we followed only what we found our parents doing. What if their parents did not understand and were not guided? The example of such disbelievers is that of parrots who repent what they hear of sounds and calls without understanding. Deaf, dumb, and blind, they cannot understand.
And can you read the footnote of 2165?
Yeah, just 1 second. Yeah, so 165, 66. Jesus, Mary, Muhammad, and Ali, and all the saints will disown their idols on the day of resurrection. See also 1686, 35 Gospel of Matthew. Yep, that's in the VC one, I believe.
I think that's idolizers.
Say it again?
I think it's just a minor correction. You said idols. I think it's idolizers.
I
So
think,
they
yeah,
are the
it's
idols.
idolizers. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Do you have it, Cho? Do you have any questions or comments on what you just read?
I mean, no, I'm pretty good. Pretty straightforward.
Anyone else?
168 to 171. Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about what was just read?
Samantha asked a question, which translation? So we use, like close by just mentioned, we use the translation by Rashad Khalifa. I can send a link if you want to access it.
And we also have, go ahead. I was just going to say we have a Quran app bot. If you want to access the Quran, any verse, you just type /Quran and then put the verse number and you can just load it right here in the chats. Go ahead. There's a comment.
I was going to make a comment regarding 165. It says all power belongs to God. Like it's going to become apparent on the day of retribution. You think about all these people, they think that, Jesus or Muhammad or Ali or the saints or God knows who else is going to intercede on their behalf. But the reality is like, none of these people have any say whatsoever regarding what's going to happen on that day. When you consider how insignificant, any other creature is in the sight of God, you realize God's the only one with any power. In Surah 5, verse 17, it says, pagans indeed are those who say that God is the Messiah, son of Mary. Say, who could oppose God if he willed to annihilate Messiah, son of Mary, and his mother, and everyone on earth? To God belongs the sovereignty of the heavens and the earth, and everything between them. He creates whatever he wills. God is omnipotent. That if God willed, none of us deserve to be here. And if God wills, he could terminate us like that. It's out of his mercy that he allows us to basically redeem ourselves. And there's another verse in 21 to 28 that describes, these righteous individuals that on the day of judgment are going to be concerned about themselves. He knows their future and their past. They do not intercede except for those already accepted by him, and they're worried about their own necks. We have the response from Abraham that he says, perhaps my Lord may forgive me on the day of judgment. And here's someone that God calls a close friend. It shows his humility that he's even worried about his outcome on the day of judgment. So this is something that, God willing, we should be reflective on, that only God can save us from the misery of that day. And on that day, we're not going to be concerned about anyone else. We're only going to be concerned about our own souls, and God willing, that God saves us from such a retribution.
So does someone want to say something? I wanted to comment on 2165. I think it's a very powerful verse. Because it says, yet some people set up idols to rival God and love them as if they are God. Those who believe love God the most. So we need to show this in our daily lives, that we love God the most. And if we fail to do this, we should do better. Because the purpose of our life is to return to God and be with God and love God and choose God as our lowercase God. We have many opportunities throughout the day to do this. And hopefully throughout our life, we make the right decision in this regard. So anything we love, anything we're passionate about, anything, any person we care about, whatever, it should not be comparable to our love and admiration and devotion to God. So we have to be very conscious of this fact, this requirement of us.
Anyone else have comments or questions? We started from 2:154, and we went all the way to 2:171. I wanted to just make a comment regarding 164. It's like so packed with things that basically show the greatness of God, the creation of the heavens and the earth. Like right now, the amount of scientific evidence we have, the fine tuning of the universe, the absolute precision that the moment of the Big Bang was so absolutely precise that it was off by the slightest iota. You know, not only would there not be an Earth, there would be no universe. That if the gravitational constant was 1 part in 10 to the 64, so meaning 0.0064 zeros, 1, gravity was stronger or lower than that, there would be no universe. If the amount of mass was, 1, again, it's like to the 80th, 80 zeros off, that we wouldn't have a universe. Then you think about the precision of just this Earth, the fact that we have, like, Earth has the largest moon than any other planet in the solar system. It also has the only planet in the observables in the solar system that has a perfect solar eclipse. The moon blocks the sun exactly in the proportions necessary to form a perfect solar eclipse. That the moon creates a 23.5-degree tilt on the Earth. That, if this was off by the slightest bit, we wouldn't have the 4 seasons. We wouldn't have the stability to be able to have, life, let alone intelligent life. That the Earth has this iron core that creates a magnetic field that shields us from the rays of the sun that are harmful to organic life. All this is like perfectly orchestrated, that if any of this was the slightest bit off, we wouldn't be here. That Earth happens to have about 83 elements of the periodic table placed on this planet in almost perfect proportions. It's fascinating. You look at the sky, that God created a system that you can take salty water, put it through clouds, traverse it, thousands of miles on dead land, and displace it to basically have crops and water for life. This is an unreal form of technology that's been created. And you can just keep going down this list of just this fascination. I mean, you take something, you take a seed, okay, of an apple. It's a dead piece of wood. You place it inside dirt. Water and sun creates a tree that produces more of this very thing that you just consumed. Like, what a miraculous concept. And there's no waste. Right now, I ship you food. It's like packaged in plastic and this and that. Everything that God does is biodegradable. It's like perfect, that somehow from the nutrients inside dirt comes, sweet and sour and crisp. Like, where does this come from? Where does the redness of the apple come from? Where does the yellow of a banana come from? Somehow in this dirt, that these nutrients are basically extracted to create these, beautiful colors. The chlorophyll. It's just like, and you can keep going down this list of just these infinite number of things that are just like mesmerizing. We just take for granted.
MashaAllah. I'd like to just add on to that a little bit some other things. The placement of the Earth within the galaxy, it's in such a place that it's not too dusty. It's not also so far out in the galaxy that we don't have enough of the elements. But the particularly interesting thing is that it's in a part of the galaxy that it's clear all around. We can see out into the universe, which is such that it's designed so that we can do self-discovery on the origins of the universe. We can look back in time because we're not obscured from the past. Also, I'd like to say in terms of God's storage devices down here, how he puts snow up in the mountains, so that it's melting all year round. It's like a storage facility for water for us to have year round. Also, in the distribution of carbon on the Earth, it's carbon we use for everything. It's the food, it's energy, and wood. It's a carbon storage system. Basically, trees absorb the carbon out of the environment, out of the atmosphere, and it's just stored in those logs, all those trees, and then later on when we need it, there it is, that kind of thing.
There's Arthur C. Clarke has a quote. It says, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. There's another quote that says, any super prolific, and I'm paraphrasing, technology is indistinguishable from nature. All this that is being described is a form of technology that God created on this planet. It became so ubiquitous that we think that this is natural. We use the term organic to mean natural. Like, there's nothing natural about this. This is a highly sophisticated form of technology that God placed on this planet that is more advanced than anything a human being can ever create. God gives us the parable in the Quran. It says, if all the humans and all the jinns band together to produce a fly, they would never be able to. It says, even if they produced the fly, if the fly consumed anything, ate a piece of food, they would never be able to get it back. That if I gave you the ingredients to make a fly, give you all the raw materials to make a fly, we would still be incapable of making a fly. There's this video, it was showing a single cell organism reach death. What happens at the time of death is the cell wall basically breaks away and the entire organism dissolves. You could take all those ingredients, all the parts from that single cell life, put it into a test tube, give it to the most advanced scientists, fund it for billions and billions of dollars, they will never be able to reconstruct that cell. When God does this, the moment of the Big Bang, this was all orchestrated in the fabric of the cosmos, that this planet Earth was going to be created, that life was going to be perfectly, calculated for. Then in addition, we have all these access of the provisions and everything that come along with it. One of the discoveries recently, they're wondering, how is it possible we have the Amazon rainforest? If you do an analysis, there isn't enough nitrogen in the Amazon to produce the rainforest based on the amount of water that basically washes away all the nutrients. They found out was that there's a rich source of nitrogen in the Sahara, because billions of years ago, this was a lush environment with plenty of life. When that life died and dissolved, it's sitting in the nutrients of the soil, and when the winds come, it carries it from the Sahara Desert all the way to the Amazon rainforest to provide it the nitrogen it needs that we basically use today for this vast amounts of cooling of the planet. So these things have been designed billions of years ago, before a single human being was ever on this planet, for us to have this comfortable, lush, provisions. This is kind of a tangent, but look at this. One of the things that we're blessed with, in addition to the moon and the sun, is these are like bodyguards for the planet Earth. Meaning that if there's like a heavenly body heading towards the Earth, you look at the surface of the moon, right? It's filled of craters. These are objects that could have totally caused destruction on Earth. Same thing with the sun. Was it in '93 we had a comet called Shoemaker? make sure the year 94. Sorry, in 94. It was a series of asteroids that could have very much annihilated planet Earth. By God's leave, not only did planet Jupiter absorb these asteroids, we were able to witness this from the comfort of planet Earth. They said any one of these asteroids, literally, if they hit the Earth, we would have been done. It's game over. And how many of these kind of cataclysmic events transpired that we're completely oblivious to? You get on top of a plane and you hit the slightest bit of turbulence, all of a sudden everyone's heart drops. Everyone's thinking about God. Everyone's thinking about life and death. You think every single day we're traversing at, depending on the scale we're looking at, right? Thousands to millions of miles an hour through the galaxy and the universe and the solar system. Not once do we consider the fact of just how astronomical of an event and how chilling this is. To think you're hurling through space, chasing this, fireball that's a million times bigger than planet Earth. We don't think twice. We never notice any turbulence. We never think about anything. The only time that it happens is when all of a sudden there's we get a close contact with some asteroid that burns up in our atmosphere. It's such a blessing that we're not constantly on the state of high alert. And it's when we are, it's only as a reminder to realize just how feeble we are.
One more comment on the Shoemaker-Levy comet impact event on Jupiter is that it was showing God's blessing in real time, how Jupiter is like a vacuum that sucks up all of this debris in the solar system and creates a nice, safe space relatively here where the Earth resides.
This is the distinguishing factor between a believer and a disbeliever. A believer sees these things and they're wowed by it, humbled by it. They become closer to God. A disbeliever sees these things and says, you guys are reading too much into this. This is a coincidence. If it wasn't for these events, we wouldn't be here. Big deal. Imagine that you were convicted of a crime and they have 50 marksmen aiming to basically for a capital punishment to execute you. And you're blindfolded, you're waiting there, they say, ready, aim, fire. And every single one of them miss. A sensible person wouldn't be like, oh, they're bad shots, cool, I'm still alive, all right, let me just get on with my day. A sensible person would be like, what the heck just happened? I was inches away, moments away from death. By God's leave, none of them shot me. They intentionally miss? Did someone put, fake bullets in the gun? What happened? And we see these miracles exponentially more perplexing than that. The vast majority of people say, what's the big deal? What? Yeah, it's the fine tuning of the universe is improbable, but yeah, we're here, so let's just enjoy it. A believer sees this, and they should be just in awe, mesmerized, constantly being like, wow, these are signs from our Lord, showing that this thing didn't happen haphazardly. That this is something that we should be in awe for, that we should be in discovery for.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we read the footnotes on the whereas yeah. 165, 166 says Jesus, Mary, Muhammad, Ali, and the saints will disown their idolizers on the day of resurrection. And then he references some verses in the Quran, and then he says, see the Gospel of Matthew 7:21-23. And what's interesting about this reference to Matthew 7:21-23 is that this footnote is saying that this is where Jesus is disowning his idolizers, right? Now, if you look at the Bible that Rashad Khalifa is holding in his hands in the video, the defense of the Bible, that one is the New American Bible, 1970 edition. There you can read Jesus saying, "I will say to those who call me Lord," or he's saying something about the day of resurrection, and then he's saying, "Everyone who calls me Lord, Lord, will not enter the gates of heaven, only the one who does the will of my Father." Now notice the statement, "Everyone who calls me Lord will not enter heaven." This statement is changed in the later versions of the New American Bible, in the 1986 one and onwards. and basically in every modern translation, it is changed to, "Not everyone who will call me Lord will enter the gates of heaven." So they changed it to "Not everyone who calls him Lord." But that's not what Jesus was saying. In practically all modern translations, you have it wrong now.
See, the sad thing about it is the further we go into the future with translations of the Bible, the worse it's going to get. The more things are going to be changed. You know, the more these people who are translating and basically rewriting these Bibles, they're going to add more things to it because they think that, okay, people are not going to really notice. So we're just going to slowly, put extra things, maybe just like a few word changes. But those things could have big effects on the meaning of a verse. So I think this is one of those times, well, yeah, this verse, changing that one word or whatever can alter basically the overall meaning of it. But then even if you were to keep it the same as like the version you read where everybody who calls me Lord, Lord, even if that were to be the same, Christians would still find a way to redefine the word Lord or kind of go back to context or try to find another verse to kind of like make sense of this, in support of Jesus being God. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, mashallah, Joe, that's a good point. Like they would have to do some kind of acrobatics to, I guess, disbelieve in that verse, but they changed it in the later versions. The one that Rashad is holding in his hands is the correct one, has the correct one.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Yeah. And it's verses like this that are very clear cut and explicit that Christians go out of their way to make sure they can fix it or change it. And it's not just a general Christian. It's like the just average Christian, not scholars or anything. They would just say that this is not what it really means. You have to look at the other parts of the Bible to kind of get the picture. Scholars would be the ones who would change or kind of like alter the words, or there'd be like a dispute among what word should go here or what order of the words should be to make it make sense. And like that just sucks. It just sucks.
I think we witness this all the time with all of the new interpretations of the Quran as a form of apologetics for perspective. And so we have all these new translations that always answer previous disputes.
But the thing is we don't have the Bible in the actual language Jesus spoke, which means that we have to look at it through a whole different language, a whole different alphabet. But in today's society, in today's world, the most common Bibles are English Bibles. Most people will look at a Bible in English. Some, they get other versions like Aramaic or like Greek. But the thing about in English is that if you can remove words, replace them with other words, and they'll have a big effect on a verse. But if you're reading it in like Greek or your Hebrew, how can I put it? Hold on. Trying to make it make sense. Because it's different from when we translate the Quran from Arabic to English, it's very different from how the Bible is translated into English. Because we get the Arabic to English, we know that, you know, there could be many English words to represent one Arabic word. So it's just a matter of what the scholar or the translator wants to include in that spot for that word. They choose one out of whatever. But it's kind of different biblically, because when you translate it, that's not really the case. A lot of the times we see the translations are the scholars, they translate what they want to be there, you know? And if they're firm believers in the Trinity and in original sin, when they're translating this stuff from Hebrew, like, you know, the term Lord or the term, you know, the God or Son, the way they translate it could be like a literal son, or it could be like metaphorical, like son of God versus a son of man. Like these things, they don't really account for. So I say it's very different when you're translating the Quran to English than when you're translating the Bible to English. So very, very big difference.
But I'd add to that though is you know,
I just point out I totally disagree. I think that I think we can witness it nightly on this server with the different Quranist views of translations all the time. I think
we don't consider Qur'anists to. I mean, the thing about Qur'anists is, well, even in that sense, translating the Quran to English means you cannot in any way alter the text to convert a verse that means one thing to something else, or change the meaning in any way. We see that when Christians, or just in general, people who follow the Bible, when they translate it from a specific language to English, those things, they just happen. It's like a default for them. You know, like the word begotten in John, I think it was John 13 or something. In some manuscripts, that word begotten didn't belong there. It's not there in the Hebrew. It's not there in the Aramaic. It was placed in there. You know, and that placement changed the entire meaning of the verses. We don't see that in the Quran. We don't. If a translator does that to the Quran, then they're basically adding to what God did not say or, you know, tell us, which is you're fabricating things against God, which is like really bad. You know, that's how I see it.
I would just point out that is precisely the argument that Quranists make against Dr. Khalifa, where Dr. Khalifa, his translation is the meaning with the whole Quran in context. And they will point out these contradictions based specifically on the argument that you laid out against the Bible. And I was just saying that what I'm saying, and I'll just leave it at that, is that we are equally susceptible. That's how I would put it.
But you have to think again, when you have just an ordinary scholar, a professor translating the Bible from a language to English, Rashad isn't that for the Quran. There are claims that Rashad's a messenger, that he received divine inspiration from Angel Gabriel from God. So that's kind of not equated in any ways. So if Quranists make claims against Rashad, well, whether or not they believe he's a messenger, they have to account for that too. So if Rashad translates the Quran from Arabic and puts it in English, things are a little different from you would look at like a clear Quran translation, which is from other translators. You have to account that, okay, there are claims that he's a messenger. You know, there are these things that he got inspiration from God, which is different from a biblical scholar translating Hebrew to English, or, you know, Greek to English, right? So I'll say that.
I don't know if I'm understood. I'm agreeing with you 100% on that last statement. That's exactly right. That we have an authorized English translation, and that's my point. And that what I see is there's a lot of attempt to. I mean, I applaud people in the attempt to understand how Dr. Khalifa got to his translation, but I do not. I think that there's a lot of wasted energy and confusion based upon the what is it? Kind of disassembly of his translation to the point to where people are saying this is not correct, that's correct, this kind of thing. Because then it's exactly what you were saying. You have people who call them scholars or not, and they're saying this is a better translation. This word should have been translated that way. And I feel like going down that path leads us to the same situation that the Christians find themselves in, different translations.
I mean, yeah, I mean, if you just look at the historicity of the biblical discourse, the original manuscripts and the original languages are all gone. All you have is English. You have this one little fragment. Go ahead.
Can
Go
I-
ahead, Levi.
Can I just interrupt? And because we're in Quran study, we don't want to get
Oh,
too
yeah.
diverted from the
Yeah,
topic.
but-
Can we just focus on the verses for now, and then we can
Yeah.
talk about we spend the whole week talking about these abstract subjects.
Yeah, that's true.
So we have questions and comments about the verses. Erdem wanted to make some points, or do you have any questions? Does anyone have any questions about any verses that we want to discuss and learn more about? I would appreciate that very much in this Quran study.
Yeah, we see in verse 2, 165. Sorry, my voice is probably really bad now. Should be better now. So we see in verse 2, 165, they set up idols to rival God and love them as if they are God. This is where we see the Shama of Israel in the Quran. You know, the Shahada, the declaration of faith. There is no other God besides the one God. This is the same declaration of faith in the Old Testament and the New Testament. However, the Old Testament and New Testament has an additional remark where it says, you shall love or adore and worship God with all your heart, right? And that's, that is not together with the declaration of faith for us. However, we do see it in this verse, loving God the most. So the Quran is actually explaining previous revelations. The Quran does this very regularly. I mean, if the Jews and Christians would just believe in the Quran, they would have a lot of topics cleared up for them. It's not about loving God only, but it's loving God the most. For example, in this verse, we see that. Yeah, that's something I thought of.
We didn't talk about 170 and 171. If anyone wants to make a comment about those two verses. When they're told, follow what God has revealed herein, they say, we follow only what we found our parents doing. What if their parents do not understand and were not guided? The example of such disbelievers is that of parrots who repeat what they hear, the sounds and calls, without understanding. Deaf, dumb, and blind, they cannot understand. If anyone has any comments or wants to say anything about those two verses, it would be appreciated. I think this is something, I mean, anyone who comes from a traditional Muslim background, they see repeatedly is that the Muslims are so infatuated with the recitation of Quran, could care almost, care less regarding the understanding of the Quran. You go look at the volumes and volumes about tajweed or, hadith. When it comes to the actual understanding of the Quran, it's like there really aren't that many sources. And they think that just by merely uttering these sounds, that is what's going to give them righteousness and protection with God. But they forget to actually, we have to implement these things. And what else that's just, it's to be appreciative for is no one else translates this verse like how Rashad translated this. equating it to parrots. And to parrot someone means to just repeat sounds and calls, obviously without the comprehension of what it is that you're saying. And a lot of people, they just say, "Oh, this just says repeats sounds and calls or cries and shouts," and they fail to understand. But, to equate them to, again, parrots, it just becomes a lot more crisp as far as the analogy that's being formed here.
Samantha, would you mind coming up and telling us about your experience? For anyone who didn't see, she wrote, "Sadly, this is how I was taught the religion when I submitted." Can you share? Would you mind sharing some of your experiences with us about this topic and what your thoughts are?
Okay, assalamualaikum. So when I came into the religion, like how I was taught, it was like just to recite everything. Like even when I was taught like the movements of the contact prayer, it was just movements and words. Like no one told me like what I'm saying in English. Everyone just wanted me to like repeat things because they heard me sing. They're like, "Oh my goodness, you have such a beautiful voice. You're gonna be such a good reciter. Like learn this in Arabic, and you're gonna be so good at speaking in Arabic." And I'm like, "Well, what am I saying?" And every time that I would question anyone, they would just ignore what I had to say or just kind of reiterate what they've been taught and how they believe and like how they've been doing it for years. And when I got married to a Muslim man, and like I came into his family, who I guess like I don't know if this is correct for me to say this, but like born Muslim. But when I like even bring up things in the Quran to them, such like divorce, they'll say, "No, that's not supposed to happen in Islam. That's haram." And I'm like, okay, there's literally like a chapter where it just like really writes out everything and how it's supposed to happen. I don't quite understand. So it's like especially for like, I don't know for anyone else, but as a revert, they don't think that you know anything or you're going to question it or you're going to read it themselves because maybe they've been learning it in Arabic, which is not their native tongue for their entire life. And so they never question it. So they expect for us to come in and never question it. And when I do question it, it's like, who am I to question when they've been in Islam their entire life? So I've just learned to kind of just shut up and just follow the Quran alone, exactly how I like to do it, and just not, say anything because I'm out of fear of not being attacked. Sorry about my kids.
No, don't be sorry. Mashallah. Yeah, people expect blind obedience, and God tells us the exact opposite. God has given us the hearing, the eyesight, and the brain, and we're responsible for using them. If we accept information just because someone else told us without investigating ourselves, we're setting those individuals as idols. This is like one of the key facets of studying, the Quran, is that we go and research and study and learn for ourselves directly from the source itself. And yeah, it's most people, they're just raised with a certain understanding and they never question it. The concept of even questioning it becomes sinful. It becomes dogmatic. And this is the shackles we're trying to break away from, that we're not just following blindly. We're not just doing what our parents told us to do. And I feel like, yeah, you always see that with the reverts and converts, typically the more likely to be closely aligned with the truth because they're looking at things critically. When someone's just born into it, they just accept it and they just run along with it. And then, it becomes too much of a threat to their way of life that if it's challenged or it's disputed.
when I actually learned about Islam, I think I was like maybe 13 years old. And it's crazy because I learned about it. I was introduced to it to a friend of mine who was the same age. And when like I came to know more and more through like her family and her older sisters and cousins and her mom and her father or whatnot, it like became so like, I don't know, crazy like how like devoted they seemed and so like strict, but like their actual kids in real life were doing way more than I would have ever imagined a 13 or 14-year-old would do. And I now as an adult, I realize it's because you're not giving them, true guidance. Like you're just telling them what to do and not why to do it. So even now as an adult and like friends in the religion as an adult, and like I see so many of the people just praying and doing the bare minimum of what they think they should do and not letting anything resonate within their heart because it's just all ritual and there's no feeling attached to it.
It's become a culture. Like it's not a religion. It's not a law book that they're aligning towards. It becomes dogmatic ritualistic practices without any foundation. And it's just funny you say that in regards to like I've seen the same thing. The people in college who are the most sheltered, they're the ones who are going to the hospital having to have their stomachs pumped. They're the ones who are getting in all kinds of like trouble, failing out of school. It's because they've been so sheltered their whole lives. In essence, the first taste of freedom they get, they don't know how to deal with it. And it's this aspect that it's like a lot of people, they want to control their kids through like oppression and force rather than logic and reason and, encouragement. Samantha, how'd you find this server, if you don't mind me asking?
I listened to the podcast. I've been listening to Quran Talk for a little bit over a year. So just recently, I've been listening the Discord at the end of the podcast. I think it's just been happening recently. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Yeah.
Inshallah. He's God. Any other thoughts, comments, things anyone wants to discuss? I think we're past the Quran study itself, so it's kind of a open discussion at this point. If anyone wants to bring up any topics of discussion. Evie, do you got any topics? Nancy?
Yeah, I think just an ongoing topic that's really important is just how, as believers in God and obviously as believers in the Quran, how do we deal with difference of opinion when it comes to Quranic topics? So how do we deal with if I have a strong view or you have a strong view on an issue in the Quran and we disagree, how do we go about like dealing with that? What's the fallout? Like, do we have to basically condemn each other or fight each other? Or what is the proper way to go about it? Because I see this issue coming up over and over again. Obviously, there's topics that people disagree on, but the way they go about dealing with that, to me, seems kind of problematic.
I mean, it is a thing that comes up a lot, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. I think as long as there's human beings on this planet, we're going to continue arguing. God gives the example in 49:9. It says if two groups of believers are fought with each other, so God's acknowledging that, look, even believers are going to fight. It says you shall reconcile them. If one group aggresses against the other, you shall fight the aggressing group until they submit to God's command. Once they submit, you shall reconcile the two groups equitably. You shall maintain justice. God loves those who are just. I think the mistake we make is we first are addressing the person's belief, rather than the behavior. Someone can have the right belief, but if their behavior is inappropriate, we have to address the behavior first. Once that's addressed and the person is acting respectfully and amicably, then we can address the belief. It's not to say that everyone's going to come to the same understanding. God willing, at least we can figure out a way to have civil discourse. But a lot of times I feel like we just equate we say, okay, whose side am I on as far as belief goes? And we turn a blind eye to the bad behavior. And if you look, this is like typically how societies crumble, is that they allow horrendous, terrible behavior because they agree with that side of the argument.
Well, maybe I'm the last person to talk about this, but just I don't know my behavior. Sometimes I'm out of control, but it comes down to the idea of a thick skin, and I believe that the Quran is teaching thick skin, disregard, just say peace. All of these verses, to me, that equates into an understanding that a believer will have a tremendously thick skin and will not react. I'm a reactor personally, and I'm trying to get over it. And so the notion of a free speech and freedom of expression that the messenger talked about in the appendix, it can only be done if we allow people to have bad behavior. Now, that's the whole thing. I'm looking at this issue and I'm saying, okay, it's my responsibility for me to have a tremendously thick skin and at the same time being tolerant of other people who do not have any of that they are acting and their behavior's off the rails. It is my responsibility to make sure mine does not. And I believe through that process that it creates a community of attractive people. Wow, look at how they behave. Even when this guy was saying all this stuff, look how they believe. Now, again, I need a lot of work to go that direction, but I think it'd be nice for us to recognize the ideal and then perhaps help each other with strategies and how to get there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The purpose of having a community, a congregation, connections with other believers is that it encourages us to do better, to do, compete in righteousness, to remind. And if we're sincere, we'll take the reminder. This doesn't mean we're perfect. Doesn't mean we're not going to lose our temper. We're not going to make mistakes. But the aspect is that if you're around other people who are on the same mission, that inshallah we can kind of push each other in the right direction, not to make the mistakes, not to fall off the deep end. And the believer will be receptive to it. Someone who's I don't want to say disbeliever, but someone whose ego has kind of got the best of them is going to be offended. And the aspect is, it's like, I think people are going to say things that are offensive. God willing, we're not going to be suspicious and try to take things in the least generous way. But if they are, we as a community, we say we don't tolerate that. It's important, I think, always for the neutral parties. Let's say if Jeff, God forbid, me and you are in a really heated argument, and I start, lashing out towards you, someone else in the community would intervene and say, hey, the way you're behaving is inappropriate. We don't tolerate that. You can do better. And in essence, we shouldn't be, when we see behavior like this, I think this is the one time we're not supposed to be neutral. We have to, in essence, say, hey, we're not going to tolerate, even if I agree. Like, let's say, for instance, Nancy calls me out. She agrees with my position, but it's her responsibility to make sure that I'm behaving and engaging in a way that's acceptable by God. I think one of the challenges is, especially, Twitter, Discord, social media as a whole, is that it just draws in people who genuinely enjoy confrontation. That just becomes problematic because you're in essence catering to that audience who's more in your face, more verbose. And but I feel like as a community, if we set that culture that we say, look, this is not how things are conducted here, and we're very rigid on that, you'll see people who have that very alpha mentality, in essence, God willing, realizing that, look, if they want to stick around, they're either going to comply and be more respectful, or they're going to be banned. There was this awesome research done on this chimpanzee group in the Congo, and it had a typical hierarchy. You had like the alpha male, you had the alpha female, the matriarchs and stuff like that, and then you had this like caste system. And one day there was a resort that opened up that was dumping their food in this proximity next to this chimpanzee troop. And one day they had a batch of contaminated meat that they threw out, and only the highest ranking members of that troop were able to eat that meat. Well, they all got sick and died. And the researchers thought, they're like, man, this is terrible. We've been studying this troop for years, and they basically bounce. Years later, they come back and they see that the troop is still there, but they notice something different. Basically, you had all these like betas who now, in essence, became the leaders of this troop. And what was interesting was that the whole dynamics of the troop changed, where they were just more respectful, they were grooming each other more, they were sharing food more, and this and that. And every time you'd have a lone, typically alpha male, who would come into the group, they started to get rowdy. They would just be shunned by the community. Eventually, you had these people who, these chimpanzees who had a tendency towards aggression, in essence, come into compliance with the group because the culture was established there. You see this like when you go to a company. If you go into a company that's very aggressive, you see like when there's a dispute, it leads to like fist pounding on tables and people yelling, and then you'll see another culture within a community where there's like strong disagreement. Everyone's respectful, everyone is kind, and it never gets to the point where it gets personal. And the objective is, God willing, to create a community. In essence, we don't have a hierarchy. We don't tolerate, aggressive people. And God willing, we try to establish a culture that if someone comes in with those tendencies, either they just leave on their own because they don't want to deal with us, or they comply and they actually become, follow the abide by the rules.
But the point I feel like is that I'm making is slightly more pointed towards our own selves. And I bring up the discussion by Dr. Khalifa of a person who says they got in a fist fight, and he said, "Well, that's the middle of the story. You got to go back to the beginning. What did you do to make them angry? Or if somebody's got a scowl on their face, you're supposed to assume they're coming from someplace else, even when they're not." This kind of self-blaming. All these stories, I think, speak specifically to this, that we're not out to make everybody else's behavior better. It's not our job. We're not their caretakers. It's ourselves. It's blaming ourselves. Oh, like I see sometimes it's just misunderstandings on this server sometimes. This guy thought he was coming from this place, or it was just the tone was off, and so therefore the other person gets aggressive. These kinds of things, and I think what I think is more valuable for us, rather than making sure our environment has proper etiquette in terms of the visitors, it's more of a exacting scrutinization of our own behavior and how we might have provoked that, how we might have got them there.
Yeah, something that recently came up that was worth kind of discussing is, so we have this channel on the server for politics. Politics is just as contentious as religion for most people. And the question was like, oh, should we have this group or not? This is too sensitive of a topic. And I'm curious what you guys think regarding that. My thought is like, look, we're not studying the Quran in a vacuum. At the end of the day, we're hoping to apply these lessons of the Quran to politics, to news, to culture, to our own lives. And I think it's important to have the channel there for people to be able to share opinions. At the same time, you just have to be respectful that we're not insulting, condescending, or badgering one another. And if someone says something we disagree with, we either don't engage, or if we are going to engage, we try to maintain, good moral conduct. I'm curious, what do you guys think? Like, do you think having the politics channel is a good thing, a bad thing, or how do we go about handling those kind of personal disputes? David, any thoughts on that, or anyone else?
Yeah, I think that it's not only important, it's crucial. It's actually vital to, like you said, having a robust discussion in various aspects of our lives in relation to our religion. Like you said, this is not the function of our religion, is to not just help us in our personal life in terms of our interaction with our families. It exceeds far beyond this. Our religion is a dictation of our lives in all aspects of life and includes all areas of the human experience. And I do believe that the Quran sets the precedent for all issues in this world. So, like you mentioned, cultural, social, political, economic, it really does engage in all these various areas. And to say that, okay, go have these conversations elsewhere, I think really damages the function of what we're trying to achieve. Because if I spend my time debating politics with people that don't even believe in the Quran, how is that? Maybe it is beneficial, maybe I do gain knowledge, but how is that the same as applying these concepts in a Quranic basis with other people that actually believe in the Quran? Right. And I think that's extremely important for us to understand. So, people say, well, politics and religion are not related or they shouldn't mix. But the fact of the matter is they do mix. People vote based on their beliefs, whether we like it or not. There is no decoupling of these concepts. Some people say, well, there's no relevance to each other. Well, our values come from our religious beliefs. And we should be voting based on our religious beliefs and our values and our ideas and what we stand for. So to neglect this area of our obligation and our, responsibilities as a good citizen, to me, is a big mistake. And if we do nothing, but we refuse to learn anything about these topics, then in my opinion, it's even worse and we're being apathetic. So we have to be very careful. Someone had said, oh, well, what if a few people are, offended? Well, you think about this in terms of speech, right? You're in a group of 5 people. Maybe you might offend one person, maybe you don't. But does that same principle apply that if you offend anyone in any setting that you shouldn't speak, 5 people can be 50 people. So you have to watch to not offend 2 people or 1 person and 50 people. What if it's 500 people? What if it's 5 million people, right? So we have to be extremely careful with the principles that we're advancing, because these have major ramifications in terms of the precedent that we're actually setting for each other and ourselves.
We get spicy and talk about Ukraine and Russia. limits out these our ability of having cordial conversations.
So I agree with Samantha Sayed that it should be allowed, it should be respectful. But unfortunately, what was happening was, and it still continued, was, you know, you have a point of view.
We don't need to get into the history. We could just say, okay, moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about anyone in particular or giving any names or anything. I'm just saying in general, we should be okay with hearing other people's point of view. And like you said, you know, that's the channel for politics. There's a channel for history. Maybe someone wants to go there and talk about ancient Egypt and all these things, or, you know, history of war or whatever. So I think it's really good to have a self-sustaining server so that the interactions are maximized with people that are interested in the Word of God, rather than, you know, dispersing these conversations to other kind of forums and platforms.
I have an idea, and I always see DC2 just sitting there at nighttime, and I don't want to take on the responsibility of myself because my schedule's so erratic, but I just think it'd be nice if we could do like a community vicar or something like that on VC2. And then another idea I had is, you know, some night of the week there could be an ongoing rediscovery of submission through a month, going through the monthly Muslim and submitter perspective, you know, just to kind of have an ongoing discussion going on based on that. Anyway, just.
You want to coordinate it? Got to take if you're game to take initiative. You got the stage set up.
Yeah, God willing, yeah, let me work on it. But if there's anybody who, if I need support, even if it's yeah, let's do that or whatever, you know, perhaps that'll be the way it happens. God willing.
I think specifically regarding politics, I feel like the biggest challenge I always run into in general with politics is that it's easy to make decisions in an ideal scenario. But, you know, the world in these events are rarely ever ideal. I think the example I always think of is this concept of like, oh yeah, there shouldn't be any tariffs because free trade is more beneficial. It's like, okay, that's a great ideal. The reality is you're going to have countries who are going to impose tariffs and sanctions and this and that. So it's like, okay, what is the appropriate action then? And I think a lot of times it's good to discuss, hey, what the ideal is. But in politics, the aspect is, okay, what do you do under these, you know, non-ideal situations? Trying to assess that via the verses of the Quran. Just came to realize, like, if you try to only say, oh, I'm going to be unwavering, and only, you know, if it's 100% this one way, otherwise I'm not going to support it. I feel like then all you're doing is kind of opening the door for terrible policies, because the the other side, you know, if the alternative, let's say you have something that is like 80% closer to a righteousness, you're not going to support it, then the side that's 100% against righteousness is basically going to be able to have their way. Anyone have any other comments, questions, suggestions, or something? Otherwise, I'm gonna bounce.
All right, so does anyone have any questions about the verses we read? I guess it's opened up for open discussion now. So obviously throughout the week we have a lot of Quranists that come on here. There's a lot of debates that go on, and obviously they say things that maybe can confuse some people. Does anyone have any questions about some of the topics that have come up with these Quranists and the discussions that have gone on?
I mean, it's not just Quranists, right? We have like traditionalist Quranists, all walks of life.
I think with the traditionalists, at least like as submitters, we read the Quran stuff, we were a little bit more accustomed to the things that they say. We're more familiar with their beliefs and kind of what their, at least for me, their positions and stuff. But with Quranists, it's just like a pulling a random, thing out of the bag every time they have something new. It's really individualized, and they'll say anything, I guess.
Had the discussion yesterday regarding the kind of the distinction between kitab, ayat, anzala, arsal, wahi. I don't know if anyone had any thoughts or questions regarding the topic. Give a kind of a short synopsis just between the two. So kitab is the literal word of God. These are direct words that God gives to a prophet, that the prophet shares with the people. When the prophet is sharing information, they're acting in the capacity of a messenger, a rasul. That's why you'll see ars, where they send a message. And then there's two words. One's anz, which is basically sending down, and then the other one's bath, which is basically rising up. So if in essence something is happening on this earth, like God says he raised prophets and messengers, that these are in essence human beings that were raised amongst us. Anzala is basically sending down. So God sends down information. And then wahy is communication. It's much broader in the sense of any communication God has with the people, the messengers, the prophets. This is all kind of various forms of communication. But on the server yesterday, there was a discussion that someone was claiming these words are synonymous, that they can be used interchangeably. But there is a significance to when one is used or another in the Arabic Quran.
Dude, sometimes I would really appreciate if you would show us what is happening when people, have you ever seen those interpretations of the prayer times where, they'll have it precisely after a certain period in the astronomical sky, so precise, and they derive it from the Quran. And I see this over extracting, it seems like to me. There's just I don't know what it is. It seems like people have this ability to extract from the Quran what they want to extract as well. And so I thought perhaps you could discuss sometime, maybe not today, but sometime, what's going on there?
So go ahead.
I was just ask Jeff if he's familiar with the concept of Sijin.
It's we put the
go ahead, please.
I'll pull them up.
Well, I've heard you explain that. I always like that one too. I don't mean what's happening. I understand precisely what you're saying in terms of what's happening with Satan's interference, but I'm kind of was thinking about the mechanics of it. What are they doing? You know, that kind of thing. Like, I understand, oh, Satan's got him, and that the Quran guides them that way. I didn't see how it was happening, though, but perhaps it doesn't matter.
So I think the concept is that not only does Satan get people, but basically the Quran becomes the Sijin, and the Sijin is the book of the wicked. And what happens is you basically misunderstand every verse, and you basically misinterpret everything, and then you actually believe in it, and you think it's the truth. And so it's the same book, it's just sending you astray, and you just pull out a lot of nonsense out of it. I think that's the mechanism of it.
What's interesting is if you, I'm putting a verse 14:26. It says, in the example, the bad word, and this is equated to falsehood, is that of a bad tree chopped at the soil level. It has no roots to keep it standing. You know, one of the most definitive sciences, or the most definitive sciences we have, is mathematics. If there's a mathematical proof, you can basically build on top of it and know that as long as, you know, all your logic is sound, whatever you state is true. And this is what makes math so profound, is that when you come up with a proof, you can not, it's not trial and error that tells you it's right or wrong. It's that you can prove that under every single feasible condition, this proof is true. What ends up happening in general with just like scriptural studies is people, they build axioms. Axioms are the foundations of what you say truth is. Like, for instance, there's different axioms in math. You say A plus B is equal to B plus A. Like, there's no way to prove this. It's just we hold this to be true. What ends up happening is people, they develop these axioms, these foundational pieces of their understanding. Then so what they end up doing is they start trying to build on top of it. As they're building, they're going to form numerous contradictions. And this shows that they have no strong foundation, because if you show that that axiom is flawed, that it's wrong, the entire tower comes crashing down. And inevitably, like a lot of these discussions we've had, people, they have an understanding. We say, okay, well, let's run with this understanding. You know, we start looking at the verses that apply, you know, this word or this ideology or this theme, and we see where does it break. We had someone on the server, they're saying, look, if you, every root of every word in Arabic, there has to be a connection. And if there isn't, then we have to go with a different understanding. We showed numerous examples, like the word to spend and hypocrite, there's a connection, you know, it's the same root. The word for a guidance and a sacrifice is the same root. The word for a ladder and name is the same root. You know, but if the person was to interpret this, they would say, oh no, there is no such thing as a ladder. It's just, they're saying a peaceful passage. And you just realize, like, really quick that it's like, okay, if this was true, all these, you know, supposed use cases should also hold true. And you have a choice at that point. You can either reassess your understanding, or you can basically live in cognitive dissonance and continue down that path and continue building on that narrative. And the higher up we build, right, the more shaky the entire ideology becomes. That's why it's like it's so important to always stick with these foundational pieces. What are the things that under all circumstances we can say is true? You know, the worship of God alone, that there's going to be a day of judgment, that we have to lead a righteous life. You know, and it's like then from there we slowly start building up. But I see that the challenge ends up happening is that when you create the Quran as a sort of Mad Lib where you can apply any meaning to any word, and all of a sudden you have no real foundation, because each time we're doing that inappropriately, we're just creating numerous contradictions. And you know, when these are become evident to us, it's at that point we have a choice. Are we going to go and, you know, clean up the misconceptions we had, or are we going to continue going down that path?
Marcel, what a nice explanation of that process, of that tendency.
There was a Princeton professor. He was trying to solve this theorem that for 300 years no one was able to prove. It's called Fermat's last theorem. It's very simple. It's so everyone's familiar with Pythagoras theorem. A to the squared plus b to the squared is equal to c to the squared, right? And what this said, it said a to the n plus b to the n is equal to c to the n for no other whole numbers greater than 2. And it seems very simple. And, this guy, Fermat, he basically said he solved this, but he couldn't write the full theorem. And so for 300 years, people were trying to solve it. This one professor spends, I think it's like 7 years in his attic trying to solve this. And finally, he solves it. He publishes his results. Keep in mind, there's only a handful of people on this planet who even were able to understand the advanced, like the complexity of the math that he's describing. But one of these individuals is looking through and realizes, oh, he made a mistake. That meant that his entire theorem, and this was like, hundreds of pages long, had to go and be reassessed. And then he went and spent, he was heartbroken. He went and spent years trying to resolve this discrepancy. And then finally he got it, republished it, they validated it, and checks out. It's just funny because, here's someone who spent 7 years to come up with something, but then is proven that, look, you made a mistake here. And rather than, arguing or something like that, he goes back to the drawing board and figures out where the error was and corrects it and comes at a different approach that is sound and comes to the right conclusion. A lot of times when we run into a discrepancy, we lash out, we get upset. And rather than saying like, okay, this is a blessing that someone pointed this out, let me go and kind of reassess my thoughts and just try to correct this. God willing, God uses the expression Sirat al-Mustaqim, the straight path, the right path, so I can be better aligned to the truth.
Hello, everyone.
Assalamualaikum.
I'm gonna ask something here controversial a little bit. I think the contention that the Qurans have is to say, well, that guy who figured out that, the originator of that math problem or answer, whatever, kind of hard to explain this, but I mean, what if that's in a sense parallels with Rashad, where we can say, oh, maybe he made a mistake, and then we go look, and then we try to figure things out and try to find what is the truth.
Is that a question or more of a comment?
Well, no, yeah, I'm gonna say it's a question because I think some people genuinely feel that way. So that's why I'm asking this. I'm saying, is Rashad is he free from this kind of criticism, like how that mathematician was able to criticize the original math?
I wouldn't say in regards to the math that he's aside from the criticism, but the aspect is the foundation of what's being stated. I would say again, if you believe that he's a messenger of God and that he was inspired with this kind of a understanding, I think that's where it needs to be clarified, because we have examples in the appendix where there's just obvious mistakes, like he actually cites, as opposed to 2:163, it says 12:163, and like Surah 12 verse 163 doesn't exist in the Quran, right? These are just like typos in essence. And there was some stuff that were put that again just probably weren't vetted, that weren't correct. But these are minimal compared to the foundational kind of aspects that he stuck to, to the very end. And the vast majority of this are verifiable. The last one is just these the alifs and then the lams, and part of that process is just the fact that, again, replicating the counts is one thing. It's being able to give defending and justifying why it should be counted this way becomes problematic. And God willing, in time, we'll have answers for that as well.
Okay, yeah. I was going to ask something else. I forgot. Right. Okay. Oh, Nancy, go ahead. No. It's a little side topic, but go ahead, Nancy.
By the way, I'm Nancy's daughter. So,
Oh.
anyways, my question was, like, I heard about, like, the idea of when it comes to religious rituals and stuff, like, universal acceptance, right? So I was wondering, like, for example, in prayer, it's like, I guess, accepted among everyone to, like, wear a head covering. So I was wondering, like, what would be the, like, what would be, like, so would this be mandatory or not?
So there's when it comes in to the Quran, it tells us what we're religiously obligated to do as far as dress code goes. And the only obligation for women is that they cover their chest, that they don't reveal too much of their bodies, and if they want to become, appears more righteous, to lengthen their garment. If we make it a requirement in the sense of the head covering, I think that this is similar to the people deciding, like, oh, how do we hold our hands? Do we put them at the side? Do we put them at the stomach, towards the center of the chest? And be apprehensive to try to make guidelines for this. For specifically like the salat, it's the words that are being stated, the motions that are being made, but I don't see the attire of clothing that someone is wearing as part of the practice. I'm curious to see what other people think.
I think it's important to note that dress code for us, if we read the verses, clothing is for humans in front of other humans. So we don't see anywhere that you're wearing clothing for God. I think that's a really important point. So when it comes to this, obviously God can see us in all, where we're wearing clothing or less clothing or whatever, or bathing, right? So clothing is for humans, and we see this in the Quran, and that's why it says, for men to subdue their eyes, women subdue their eyes. So the question in particular was about prayer and universal acceptance of that. However, the concept that they're drawing that from is from a mistranslation of the verse. So they're saying that they're applying 24:31, but then they're applying that to prayer. But they're saying that it's not just for prayer, it's at all times. So they're mixing the issues here. It's a false translation of 24:31, where God actually never says to cover your hair. And if we look in the Quran, we never see the words hair, head, face, any of this when it comes to dress code or clothing or items of, our garments. And it's very easy for God to just say it. God could just say, cover your head, cover your hair, very easily, right? Because God says, cover your chest. Why would he say cover your chest and not say cover your head if that was necessary? So Katerina brought up the point that Moses took off his sandals as a form of respect, and we do agree. Everyone agrees. I guess the traditionalists don't agree to have to take off their shoes for prayer, and they actually do wudu with their shoes on sometimes.
Isn't that interesting? The one thing, article of clothing, they isn't mandatory to do anything is the shoes. It's the one that's mentioned in the Quran. That's a funny point.
I personally don't think it's a requirement to be in a particular level of dress when you want to do salat. Again, because I believe that dress is for humans and not for God.
You know the verse that says like when you go to the masjid to something be clean and dress nicely. So what that does that when it says the masjid, does it mean like a building that's like a called masjid, like a masjid this or masjid that, or is it talking about or you know like what does it mean? Like when you go to what masjid, like a building
So,
masjid, or is it yeah?
so yeah, it's talking about a formal congregation that you're attending, and it says basically to dress up. And so, if the requirement was to dress up for every prayer, then you would have to be dressed up at all times. But that's not what it's saying. And I see it similar to Christians when they go to church, they wear their best clothes, they dress up, they dress nicely to go to the masjid because you're representing your religion to the whole world. You're representing the religion to other members of that congregation and also everyone else who is aware that you'd have this religious attendance that you go to this religious congregation in whatever building or whatever room it's in.
Yeah, because just because I see some people translate that as place of worship, so I was wondering if since masjid is an Arabic word, I was wondering if if the word was translated to English, would it mean something else? And yeah, that's why I was just confused because it's like kind of accepted by everyone to like wear clothes during salat at least, and also head covering. So I was kind of wondering if this was like something passed down or not.
So again, if you're going to argue that masjid, it says when you go to the masjid, you should. We could put the verse. If you're arguing that anywhere you pray is automatically a masjid, I don't know if that's necessarily an appropriate interpretation. Let's look at the verse.
Yeah, but I think it is talking about like a building, like a place that's for like worship, I guess, like a building masjid, not just any place because it says the masjid, it makes it feel like a noun, I don't know. And also I think in one of Rashad's videos I heard him saying like the point is basically, if you go smelling bad or stuff like that, then other people are gonna, kind of it's gonna, be distractive.
And also, we know this is correct because it has to be that because during the nights of Ramadan, it says if you decide to retreat to the masjid, you cannot have sexual intercourse at night. So if you cannot have sexual relations, obviously it's not your house. It's talking about somewhere else, right? So I put the verse. It says, therefore, this is 187. I could just read the whole verse. It's kind of long, but bear with me. So 2 verses I put. 731 says, O children of Adam, you shall be clean and dress nicely when you go to the masjid. And eat and drink moderately, surely does not love the gluttons. And then 187 says, permitted sexual intercourse with your wives during the nights of fasting. They are keepers of your secrets, and you are the keepers of their secrets. God knew that you used to betray your souls, and he has redeemed you, and and pardoned you. Henceforth you may have intercourse with them, seeking what God has permitted for you. You may eat and drink until the white thread of light becomes distinguishable from the dark thread of night at dawn. Then you shall fast until sunset. Sexual intercourse is prohibited if you decide to retreat to the masjid during the last 10 days of Ramadan. These are God's laws. You shall not transgress them. God thus clarifies his revelations for the people that they may attain salvation. So where is the masjid in this verse? Because it says sexual intercourse is prohibited if you decide to retreat to the masjid. But if anyone is gonna interpret the phrase masjid or term masjid meaning anywhere that you can do any prayer, then that means you can never have, sexual intercourse in that building or whatever setting that you reside at, right? Because you're going to do the prayer there anyway. So that's obviously not what it's referring to.
So basically, like, you don't think that dress has anything to do with the actual ritual itself?
I personally don't think so. Again, I think the whole point of dress code and dressing is for humans. It has nothing to do with God or the jinns or angels or anyone else, really. I think the whole point of dressing is for each other, because then it says you relax dress code in a list of people that you're related to or different circumstances, or even it says the elderly women commit nothing wrong by relaxing their dress code, provided they do not reveal too much of their body. So does that who does that apply to? Is it them when they're alone? Obviously not. They can dress however they want when they're alone. It's talking about when they're with other people. So are we going to put God in that category, or we say that they can dress more relaxed in their salat because they're elderly? No, it has nothing to do with their appearance in front of God. It's talking about the way they are in front of other people. And that's the whole function of dress code and why we even have it in the first place, because we're not animals.
And what about being reverent during the prayer? You don't think that has to do with physical appearance?
I personally don't think so, no. So Katerina wrote, I agree. It's just the verse about Moses. He took off his sandals. Oh, actually, sorry. Robert wrote before that. Not that God is shy from our nudity. He is the one that created us anyway. I agree. It's the verse about Moses. He took off his sandals as a form of respect, and God told them to. Also, Adam and Eve covered themselves. Their body became apparent, and they hid from God. I'm not sure if they necessarily hid from God. Maybe they hid from each other because they were embarrassed. You can't really hide from God. We take showers. There's no way to hide from God. Another verse that was put is in 7:22. It says, he thus duped them with lies. As soon as they tasted the tree, their bodies became visible to them, and they tried to cover themselves with the leaves of paradise. Their Lord called upon them, did I not enjoin you from that tree and warn you that the devil is your most ardent enemy?